Kicking off the list at number 5, we have the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. 1974. Oh, okay, so this movie, where to start with this? Okay, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, of course the original back in 1974, is praised as one of the all-time greatest horror films. The first time we see Leatherface in action is when Kurt decides it's a wonderful idea to just waltz into a random house, and this scene is just so disturbing because there's no music, there's no hint that there's an oncoming danger. We don't get a, thing, there's no shark music, just this big ass dude with a hammer steps into frame and smacks Kirk in the head, causing him to collapse and then have a seizure. Yeah, it is so disturbing, you almost can't believe what you just saw, like it comes out of nowhere. I watched this when I was young and I thought to myself, oh, it's old, it came out in the 70s, whatever, they probably had a low budget, it's probably silly. Let's see. Holy shit. Okay, so what did we just see? He slams the door like he's excited too. He's like, bam, one down. Now we're eating good tonight, gang. Let's do it. Tobe Hooper directed this movie and it's always made me feel weird every time I watch it. It's crazy. Like part of me thinks that it's real in a weird way. I guess because it's so old, I don't recognize any of the actors, and the small budget they had to work with it gave it this nice homey feeling when it came to the prop work. And before we go on to number 4, guys, if you could go ahead and give us a thumbs up because it helps us out a ton over here at the studio. If we get enough likes by New Year's, they'll let me go home, so please. Number 4, the nun scene. Conjuring 2. Okay, sometimes pop-ups just don't cut it in horror, unless it's The Exorcist and you have these quick images pop up to subconsciously scare you, which is just crazy to think of. But it's the slow ones that really get to you. So in The Conjuring 2, we get to see this lovely runway walk. This part is arguably the scariest part in the movie, and it's dead silent. We have Lorraine Warren making the same face as us while she watches this shadow seemingly come to life. I mean, the painting alone was enough to send chills down your spine. Now we got a demon coming through it on the other side. That's, oh my god. This was the scariest scene that I've ever seen in a movie theater. I mean, it's definitely up there. What gets viewers into the scene the most is I think the first time we see the nun in the hallway moments before. It has a real shining hallway feel, you know, real comforting. So we're not expecting anything loud at this point. We're already in this quiet, shocked state as we watch this unfold in their house. Now this demon, Valak, the nun, did so well in this movie that a prequel was released not long after. I love the universe James Wan is putting together as well. Universal tried to make a MonsterVerse, but that lasted like a month. I don't know, everyone quit or got fired. I don't know what's going on there. But James Wan is doing well so far, so in Wan we trust. Number 3, Misery. Hobbling. There's a fun word. The definition of hobbling a person means to crush their bones in their ankles and feet so that they can't walk. A classic torture technique we see in the 1990 Rob Reiner classic, Misery, of course based on the Stephen King novel. Now it's the tense tale of a famous author, Paul Sheldon, played by James Caan, as he gets kidnapped by superfan Annie Wilkes, played by the amazing Kathy Bates. Kathy Bates picked up an Oscar for her performance in this movie, and for good reason. She absolutely crushes it. She is terrifying. So the hobbling scene is done so well. I mean, the tension is built up, again, quietly. It's this quiet buildup that comes out of nowhere. It's almost like our two leads are whispering back and forth to each other, but that doesn't last long as Andy breaks both of his ankles. So this is right after Andy discovers Paul's been walking around and even takes a knife that he had hidden under the mattress. And she shows the knife to Paul, so we think in our heads, oh, she's gonna cut off his foot like in the book. Because in the book, it was actually way worse, believe it or not. See, originally, Stephen King had it so Andy takes an axe to Paul's foot and then cauterizes it with a propane torch. But I feel like we've seen stuff like that in Saw. Like, I don't know, it kind of just doesn't last nearly as long in our heads than this awful scene does. Like, I would take a gory scene that's fast over this quiet, slow burn where both of his ankles are just toast. Like his feet are just folded in like a pair of old Uggs. Just, God, give it up. So when fans loved the movie, they of course picked up the book afterwards and then enjoyed it more. I mean, because we hear more of Paul's inner voice during this entire nightmare. But the detail that King goes into for the foot cutting part, It's honestly just a must read. And the movie is a must watch for sure. If you haven't seen it, what are you doing? Get out of that rock you live under and go watch it. It's terrifying. Number 2, Nightmare on Elm Street 4, The Dream Master. No pain, no gain. Here we go. From the 1988 installment of the classic Dream Slasher series, we get a scene we didn't know we needed. And it's so gross. So we have Debbie, played by Brooke Tice, and she's working out, to try and stay awake. Not a bad idea at all. Instead of relaxing, let's just bench press and get super ripped. I see you, that's a great plan. So when Freddy comes around, you can just, box him in a couple times. Makes sense. Except this turns out to be a dream all along. Of course. So she thought she could outsmart Robert Englund. No chance, Debbie. So as she's bench pressing, Freddy appears over her and starts to add a little bit of weight. Like an amount of weight that would cause both of your arms to break, and then the bones rip through the skin, and it's so gross. It's disgusting. All these scenes are so gross. Like looking back at this clip, I laughed at first because like the arms look fake and silly, but it gets worse. It gets really disturbing. That's not the scariest part, weirdly enough. Like they could have stopped there with the arms folding out and I would have been like, great, terrifying. But the scene kept going and we felt more sick. So she sits up and then flops her arms down, which is the worst thing I've ever seen. I guess to, show the audience that they are indeed broken arms. Horrible. And then to make matters worse, she starts to transform into a cockroach. Like new cockroach arms start growing out of where her old arms used to be. And then she of course tries to run away, whereas if that was me, I would faint. I would have fainted during the workout, probably, realistically. These noodle arms ain't shit. So she runs, but Freddy manipulates her surroundings like he does, and then poof, she's in a roach motel. So it's getting worse. And then she falls to the ground and tries to get her face out of the sticky glue that's on the ground. And then she gets out of the stickiness, but her face doesn't. Her face peels off. It's there, it's stuck in there. And she's like, ugh. And then to take the place of the old face, a horrible cockroach face grows instead. And then finally Freddy goes, that's enough, and then squishes the motel with his bare hands. I mean, filming this looked like a hell of a lot of fun. They used a lot of practical effects, of course, so I'm sure the uncomfortable look in Debbie's eyes was pretty easy to pull out. And finally, number 1, Hereditary. Released in 2018, written and directed by Ari Aster, who is killing the horror game, Hereditary tells the story of a family who's just trying to cope with the death of their grandmother. But then Payman comes in and just messes everybody's lives up, and we love to see it. Hereditary is full of many disturbing scenes, brilliantly directed and well thought out scenes, but so disturbing nonetheless. There's this one scene in particular that happens quite early in the film, and it's right after a house party. Spoilers coming up hot if you haven't seen it. It's a pretty new movie, so I'll give you a heads up. So Charlie is very allergic to nuts. So much so that eating some by accident at a party led to her horrible death. And it wasn't in the way that you think. So Peter grabs Charlie as she's struggling for air and then takes off driving really fast. He was at the party, he made some bad choices, he wasn't sober, so the panic was really coming out. He's swerving around the road, looking back to make sure she can breathe. It's dark, he's stoned, it's stressful. It's unfortunately a scene that we can't look away from. It is super pivotal to the plot, and it gets really disturbing really fast. So yeah, this is already one of the craziest scenes ever. The theater was so not still at this point. There's a lot of shifting around, a lot of jackets, some zippers moving. The anxiety was real, but the anxiety quickly turned into silent shock when Peter swerves to avoid some roadkill and gets a little too close to a telephone pole. And then it does indeed get much worse. We see him stunned. He doesn't even look back at what just happens. He just drives home quietly, he walks into his house and just lays down. And the camera's on his face as the sun comes up, and then all we hear is the screams of his mother, played by Toni Collette, and it's just brutal. It just reminds us how permanent and awful this moment is, especially at a time where someone in the family already died. This is so awful, and obviously you see her head on the ground and it's covered in flies and shit. So yeah, lovely.
Coming in at number 5, we've got Ex Machina. Alex Garland doesn't often miss when it comes to exciting, razor-sharp horror movies. He wrote 28 Days Later, he directed Annihilation, and of course, he's the mind behind Ex Machina. Maybe not considered a pure horror by the more discerning of spooky movie viewers, but it's definitely packed full of thrilling and terrifying moments. And once it gets going, it does not stop. But before it does any of the insane stuff promised, it lulls audiences into a sense of false security. Gorgeous vistas, a believable yet intriguing cover story, a cast of characters that definitely have some secrets. It's all set up for you to fall easily into the story, but then everything changes. Things get weird, like weird, and violent. Seriously, if you haven't seen this movie, go in knowing as little as possible. Watching it unfold will have you at the edge of your seat, and some moments will knock you to the floor out of nowhere. We follow a lonely tech dude as he wins a contest at work and gets flown out to his eccentric boss's woodland retreat. Here he meets a robot woman imbued with some extremely advanced AI. Turns out vacation actually means helping find out whether a sexy machine lady can pass the Turing test or not. When you leave a lonely tech worker alone with a beautiful and seemingly totally innocent robot woman, what do you think happens? Romance, intrigue, plotting, murder? Oh baby, what a wild ride. Coming in number 4, we've got Bird Box. The breakout Netflix hit of 2018. There was a time when I thought people would talk about this movie forever. It was that popular. And for good reason too. It was a tense, scary thriller set in a fascinating post-apocalyptic world. Based on the novel of the same name by Josh Malerman, we follow a woman trying to protect her children from the terrifying monsters that have essentially taken over the world. If anyone sees one of the creatures, they will immediately commit suicide. The horrid visages of the beast drive people insane immediately, forcing them to end their lives. So everyone has adapted in order to survive. Lots of folks go about their lives blindfolded in order to avoid contact with these terrors. However, the unknown isn't the only threat. There are people looking to make things that much worse for survivors, adding all sorts of new concerns for post-apocalyptic life. It's a struggle for survival on multiple fronts across a 5-year gap. Mallory, the woman with 2 children, is shown at 2 different points during the end of the world, at the very beginning and 5 years later. Both scenarios are nightmarish, with the early days requiring survivors to think and act fast with no previous knowledge related to the unseeable entities, and the later days showing that people are willing to tear down protective norms. Of course, the addition of children raises the stakes too. Tense and shocking, Bird Box is a horror thriller that will have you at the edge of your seat, or bed, or yoga mat, as it is a Netflix movie after all. Coming in at number 3, we've got The Orphanage. Equal measures scary and sad, The Orphanage is a phenomenal work of art. J.A. Bayona directed it based on a script by Sergio G. Sanchez with some assistance from the one and only Guillermo del Toro. 30 years after being adopted, a woman named Laura returns to the orphanage where she grew up. Her husband Carlos and adopted son Simon come with her. As Laura and Carlos discuss reopening the orphanage, Simon starts acting weird. He says he's made friends with a boy with a sack mask. Creepy occurrences compound as Laura stumbles upon a mystery from years ago. A social worker shows up and attempts to take her son away. Soon after, Simon does indeed disappear, and there aren't a whole lot of clues as to how this happened. Ghosts make appearances and tensions run high. It's a slow burn, but there are moments of sheer terror. Of course, the human story at the core of it all is the most important factor here. It adds layers of grief and fear that wouldn't have existed if it were a straightforward scarefest. And of course, you can't be sure of anything. The suspense that runs through this flick is backed up by the unreliable main character. Sure, Laura is a loving mother and an entrepreneurial spirit, but she's also plagued with guilt after strange events transpired following her exit from the orphanage as a child. Plus, it's light on jump scares, heavy on atmosphere. There are a few shocking bits, but it largely relies on that dark and creepy feel it's set up. Just make sure to take a very deep breath before starting. Coming in number 2, we've got The Birds. We've talked about suspense in the other flicks on this list, so now let's talk about a man who knew suspense inside and out. Alfred Hitchcock knew how to make movies unlike anyone else. Throughout his illustrious career as a filmmaker, he gave plenty of quality advice about what makes a movie work. Of course, the most memorable of his tips had to do with suspense. Like the difference between a surprise and suspense, a bomb going off versus a bomb ticking underneath the table as folks go about their activities. Or how knowing that someone might be late for their train can make a taxi ride that much more interesting. Or maybe by slowly introducing a whole bunch of lunatic birds to a story of social intrigue in a small coastal town. Considered by many to be the last great Hitchcock thriller, The Birds does a lot right. It presents the audience with a cast of characters so caught up in their own personal dramas they fail to realize what was going on around them until it's too late. It tells a story with seemingly no way out, dooming the folks on screen. It even manages to make birds exceedingly scary, which I honestly never even considered. Actually, once I got chased by a defensive mama bird, so maybe I did know they could be scary on a deeper level. But still, Hitchcock managed to terrify the nation with a film about killer birds. There are many analyses and theories as to what the movie's really about, ranging from Cold War fears to anti-feminist ideologies, but in the end, none of that truly matters. What does matter is the fact that it's a thrilling and often terrifying journey that is worth taking more than once. And finally, at number 1, we've got The Silence of the Lambs. See, I bet a bunch of you were waiting for me to leave this one out so you could leave some indignant comments down below. Well, fret not, save those incensed words for the next mistake I make. Dr. Hannibal Lecter's triumphant escape takes the top spot. It's hard to imagine a more iconic, more complete thriller. A young FBI trainee is thrown into the fire as she reaches out to the cannibalistic genius in order to track down the skin suit obsessed Buffalo Bill. The Silence of the Lambs expertly employs mystery and suspense in tandem, giving small insights into what's actually going on behind the scenes while Agent Starling desperately searches for answers. There's never a dull moment as Lecter helps Starling in exchange for information on herself, all the while planning an escape of his very own. Plenty of moving parts make for some thrilling sequences, but the movie never feels bogged down by the different tales it's set up. You're invested in Starling's success and safety, as well as Buffalo Bill's capture, in addition to the brilliance of Dr. Lecter. The crowning achievement here has to be the cross-cut sequence where FBI agents are convinced they've found Buffalo Bill's hideout. They set up a perimeter around the house as Bill panics at the realization that his dog has fallen down the well with his next victim. The scene gets more and more tense and it starts to look like they're gonna bring the serial killer down. Too bad though, because the tactical squad is actually at the wrong house and Agent Starling is the one flying solo at the real hideout. This sequence doesn't get your blood pumping, I don't know what to tell you. A true classic in every sense of the word, The Silence of the Lambs is essential horror thriller viewing. Coming in at number 5, 7. Fincher, you mad genius. You created a movie that nobody can resist bringing up in a conversation about messed up or sinning, or thrillers in general. Man, this is a good movie. Of course, it kind of falls into the same zone as Silence of the Lambs, where I can't really be sure if it's actually categorized as horror. Like, there are some creepy bits in here, and the bodies that they discover are often disfigured in really upsetting ways, but is it actually a horror movie? For the purposes of today's video, the answer is yes. Question me and pay the price. We follow Detective David Mills as he starts a new position in a new city. He just moved out there with his wife and wants to make a difference. Soon, a friendship blossoms between Mills and soon-to-retire Somerset. They're set to investigate a bunch of grotesque murders, ones inspired by the 7 deadly sins. There's a man who was forced to eat himself to death, a greedy lawyer forced to remove a pound of flesh from his body, and a man tied to a bed, kept just barely alive for an extended period of time. The kills continue as they investigate, leading the 2 detectives closer and closer to their killer. 7's been around for quite a while now, so I would assume that it's the kind of movie nobody can get mad at spoilers for, but in the interest in letting any interested parties watch the chaos unfold totally organically, I'll stop my plot summary there. What I will do though is praise it for defying expectations multiple times and really twisting the knife once it goes in. The way each new crime is revealed is fascinating and engaging, and Fincher manages to keep the feeling of tension and helplessness alive the entire time. Quality performances, pitch perfect camera work, and the most gut-wrenching ending of 1995 all come together to ensure whoever starts this movie will finish it at least a whole foot closer to the screen than when they started. Coming in at number 4, we've got The Bone Collector. Surprisingly enough, this movie is not about archaeology. It's about a serial killer very much like the one in 7. They're creative. Each crime scene is like a little piece of performance art. This lunatic who buries people in gravel and hacks off their fingers. Well, that happens once, I guess. Other kills involve the use of rats to eat someone's face off and tying a grandfather-granddaughter duo to a pier during rising tide. Very creative indeed. Angelina Jolie and Denzel Washington headline this thriller and do a really good job of making you like the characters. You care about them, so all the insane stuff they have to deal with has that much more impact. Most thrillers have a little bit of restraint when it comes to the kills, but not The Bone Collector. This wild ride has been likened to slasher flicks many times and deserves these comparisons entirely. Just a blast and a half if you can look past the contrived story. Coming in at number 3, we've got From Hell. We've actually talked about the graphic novel this movie was based on before. Definitely worth a read if you enjoyed the movie, and it's on our top 5 scary graphic novels list too. It's wicked either way. Back to the flick though. This is the tale of a detective trying to track down Jack the Ripper, like the Jack the Ripper. Oh yeah. Johnny Depp is Inspector Frederick Aberline, the opium-smoking wonderkind that can see things other people can't. You know, as long as he stays away from the opium dens. Or actually, the opium might be helping him, but that's besides the point. As more and more die, it becomes clear that a serial killer's on the loose. One with more education than you'd think too, based on the really precise kills. Turns out the Freemasons are involved and Mr. Aberline is in serious danger. Plenty of intrigue here. This is the story of Jack the Ripper in context with the times. Work was controversial, so rich, powerful people didn't really want to be associated with it. So it sort of makes sense for a Masonic maniac to go around tearing women apart to protect his and his colleagues' reputations. Bringing all sorts of elements together from all sorts of genres, From Hell weaves a complex web. We have gothic tendencies, we have slasher-style kills, we have a Sherlock-style lead. It's fascinating and freaky at the same time. Coming in at number 2, I Saw the Devil. Now, if you're seriously looking for some more thrillers that get to the core of human nature, you've got to go international. Korean film has gone long underappreciated, especially in the thriller horror sphere. Hollywood gets a lot of flack for relying on the same tired tropes and always resolving everything at the end, and that kind of stuff happens a lot less in South Korean film. Sure, Parasite exploded out of the scene and opened everyone's eyes, but now it's time to delve a little deeper. I Saw the Devil is a truly dark, painful, and challenging thriller. We kick off with a truly brutal murder. A pregnant woman is beaten, kidnapped, and chopped to pieces. Turns out her fiance is an agent of the National Intelligence System, and he swears to enact revenge on whoever did this to her. After a short investigation, he discovers the identity of her killer. Staking out his house, he finds the killer assaulting a schoolgirl and brutally beats him. Instead of killing him outright, he places a GPS tracker in the killer. Then, every time the killer tries to pull off another murder, the widower shows up and tortures him again. This turns into the world's most violent game of cat and mouse, with both killer and agent attempting to outsmart and outbleed the other. Every time the violence seems like it's gonna peak, something even more vile and vicious happens. This is a movie that will stick with you long after you watch it. It's really hard to forget. And with that, I'll let you go and watch it. So maybe bring a barf bag and an oxygen tank though, just in case. And finally at number 1, we've got Green Room. Oh baby, this is one of the craziest, tensest flicks out there. Once it kicks off, every moment is more heinous and callous than the last. We follow a punk band as they tour America in their van, barely making enough money at each show to make it to the next one. When a venue cancels on them, they're forced to make a detour to a bar in the middle of the woods to make sure they've got enough money to keep going. At first, it's pretty uncomfortable, you know, because it's a bar, but they play their show, have some bottles thrown at them, collect their cash, and head for the exit. But whoops, somebody forgot their phone in the green room. Better go grab it. This is now the story of accidentally witnessing a murder at a bar. Not a situation anybody wants to find themselves in. From that point on, the band has to fight for their lives against a bunch of murderous skinheads who want them to stay quiet. Dead quiet. This flick contains some of the most brutal, unsparing violence in recent memories. Arms are crushed in doors, bellies are slit open, dogs are sicked on unsuspecting individuals. And all this happens without any sort of embellishment. It's just human bodies being damaged. Of course, a thriller's nothing without some stand-up performances, and this movie has plenty of them. The late, great Anton Yelchin leads the way with fantastic support from Macon Blair, Imogen Poots, and of course, Patrick Stewart. For an experience that'll keep you on the edge of your seat for the entire runtime, check out Green Room. Seriously, go watch this movie right now. Do it.